Welcome to one of our first talkbacks in reference to the material that we have just taken a look at, and more importantly, the themes and the ideas that have come out of it. My name is Gerald vanHeerden. I'm artistic director of VMHF Theatricals, and it's my pleasure to welcome three very stellar professionals in their own right in their world. And our first person is Mr. Ted Swinley, moderator. Ted is internationally known as a writer and director of the popular musical Always Patsy Cline. He's founding artistic director of Stages Rep in Houston, Texas. He was also named to the Esquire magazine's Register of Outstanding Americans in Arts and Letters. Mr. Swinley was the recipient of the Los Angeles Dramalogue Award for Outstanding Direction of Carnal Knowledge by Jules Feiffer. Currently, he is the president of Ted Swinley Productions, Inc., a theatrical licensing and consulting company, and continues his 40-year career writing plays and musicals, consulting and mentoring playwrights, as well as directing plays and musicals for various theaters throughout the U.S. and abroad.
That's the short version.
Thank you, Ted. And our next guest is Miss Michelle Tyreen Johnson. Michelle is a public radio journalist, author, and speaker from the Kansas City, Missouri area, who now lives in Louisville, Kentucky. As a playwright, Miss Johnson's plays have been staged nationally, including in California, Texas, Illinois, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Kentucky. Several of her plays, such as The Whitcomb in the Hood, The Negro Whisperer, Trading Races from Rodney King to Paula Deen, Echoes of Octavia, and The Green Book Wine Club Train Trip, have been in the New York City festivals and readings. Her play, Only One Day a Year, was chosen for the Kennedy Center's 2020 New Vision, New Voices Festival, and recently received an award from the National Endowment for the Arts for its world premiere at the Coterie Theater in Kansas City, Missouri. Ms. Johnson is a candidate for her MFA in playwriting at Spalding University. Welcome, Michelle. And our third panelist is Miss Pastor Heather Hayward. Heather Hayward is a Lutheran ELCA pastor in Madison, Wisconsin, and has been in ordained ministry for just over 20 years. She is currently leading a congregation that is passionate about racial diversity and has a diverse family as well, with a daughter who was born in Ethiopia. The questions about faith and diversity are therefore near and dear to her heart. And once again, welcome to you all. And now I'll turn over the conversation to Mr. Ted Swinley.
Thank you. I want to first say that I think it's wonderful that this dialogue is going on, as it must in every corner of our universe today, because we are dealing with such critical human relationships that are now, I think, being explored in all new ways, and never before seen such a vulnerability develop. And I'm glad to see it happen, as painful as it may seem. I believe it's moving in a great way, as hard as it is, and it may be difficult to see it that way, but I do. I wanted to speak first. I'd like each of us to speak to briefly about our experience with the plight, the tragedy, the horror of racism in America. I am a child of the Jim Crow South. I am from South Carolina. I witnessed it all pretty much firsthand. I remember the drinking fountains, segregated, the movie houses, the everything as a child, and nothing was made of it until, fortunately, I had a loving father who was I guess you would call him a liberal and an abolitionist, even though slavery had been gone, but a man with great heart and a great conscience who, even though secretly we had to not be too vocal with our thoughts and feelings about equality of all men, he taught me in a good way. And consequently, I wrote a play called Rebel Yell, which is about that very topic, which is really the exploration of how racism tore up a white family, which is a different perspective altogether. So my authenticity can bring, I think, that perspective to this discussion. That's what I'd like to say. And we can move on to whoever would like to maybe speak next about their experience. Heather?
Sure. I think until recently was not even aware of my privilege as much as I would like to say that that was true. I grew up in a very diverse area. My first memory of what a pastor looks like was a Black woman. And so, like, especially the connection with faith and diversity, which I think is kind of why I'm here. And that connection of what does our faith say about inclusion and equality and equity. So that sense of my growing up, I don't think I recognized what racism was, which is of course part of my privilege. So recognizing that has been a journey, especially this past year. When I was asked early on in life what my family looked like, if I could like project out what my family was going to look like, I always imagined having a family with multiracial makeup. And so when the opportunity came to have children, I knew I wanted to adopt, and I wanted to adopt with a racial mix. So I adopted my daughter from Ethiopia. But I still don't think I recognized what she was gonna manage. She's now 13, and we took a class together last year that's being presented in Madison, but it's now online for anyone to take. It's called Black History for a New Day. And it totally changed my perspective. And it was great to have the conversation with her so we can have some awareness together. So I feel like I have just started the journey of awareness to what racial equity really could and should be. So, so I really appreciated the conversation of this play because I think it speaks to a lot of what I've been wrestling with personally. So,
Okay.
And as you all can probably tell from the community, I'm Black. And I always say to people that I say Black and not African American for a couple of reasons, because Black and white are descriptors. They're not really anything that tells you anything about anybody, okay? Like if you're white, you're not from the land of white. And while I am of African descent because, you know, ancestry DNA tells me that, there are Black people who aren't of African descent. There are people who are of Caribbean descent. You know, the diaspora is very wide and very diverse. And my experience with race and racism in America is the obvious. I'm a Black woman. And I think what is one of the most difficult things for, I think, most white Americans to get is that racism isn't about standing on a table saying the N-word over and over again. It's not about being pulled over and beaten by police. It is those things, and it's I'm better educated than the majority of anybody that I know. I'm a non-practicing attorney who's getting her third degree. So, you know, I'm about to have an MFA in playwriting after receiving a law degree over 25 years ago. I don't obviously haven't practiced in a while, but the point is that I deal with racism in ways that so many white people wouldn't even call racism, because it's outside of the box of what they're willing to acknowledge. Sometimes racism is something as simple as failure to give me the same respect in a situation that you give people who aren't Black, or that you give people who aren't Black women. And, you know, I moved to Louisville, Kentucky, literally in the middle of the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor protest. And because Breonna Taylor is from Louisville, it was really never a George Floyd protest. It was always a Breonna Taylor protest. And you know, Gerald knows a little bit about me. If ever there was a place I was meant to be at a time I was meant to be, especially in journalism as a talk show producer, where I get to help curate discussions, let's just say it right now, I'm living on brand.
Great, great. Well, you know, a couple of thoughts have come to my mind as we've all spoken on our particular ways into our own journeys regarding this topic. You know, one that I thought of as far as the distance that I was brought up to feel, in church, we had every Sunday night, we had a group, we were called the Milos, and Milos had to do with missions, you know, missions for youth or something. Anyway, every meeting we opened the meeting singing Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Okay, fine. But that was always of the world, not of America. It was never, the presentation was never here. It was always all of those that were across the ocean. That was never ever, we never even brought it home. So there was an example of where it came very vividly to me about this issue of how easy it is for that tension between the local, as I was talking to you earlier about the micro macro kind of thing, that where do we get from it being in our consciousness, in our everyday kind of experience, as opposed to this larger thing is how is the media going to represent us in a big way? What, you know, that whole discussion that happens fairly early in the play. I don't want to get us off track on that, but that's just one thing that has been on my mind about the play. If you'd like to speak to that or something else regarding the play, that would be fine.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, I really appreciated the conversation around faith and how the church has, in so many ways, you know, said we were welcoming, but not at all. Both for the racial diversity and the sexual orientation diversity, the conversation that happens in the play for both of those young men in the play, like I'm hoping that I serve a church, larger denomination, as well as this congregation that is looking to open that up and debunk some of that, that sense that the church doesn't welcome, that it's just full of hypocrites. So I personally appreciated that conversation of how do we make sure that our welcome is genuine and authentic to all people, and that it's not just we welcome all and the rubber doesn't meet the road anywhere with that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that I think they still find that the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings.
Right.
That it still is. And I would be curious to ask you, how are you approaching it now? And has that happened in, say, the last year or so, because of all, it's become more intense in the last year or so?
Yeah, I would say for sure. I started at this congregation 2 months before the pandemic started. So I kind of entered into, again, what I thought was an open congregation. But then when we started having conversations after George Floyd, we read a book together called Dear Church by Lenny Duncan, who is a really outspoken Black man in the Lutheran Church, about how we have to change, how we have to adjust, how we see hierarchy, how we see who's in leadership. Are we hearing all the voices? And we read that together the end of last summer, and I thought it was going great. I think I might have just been in the honeymoon period with this church, or I don't know. But by this spring, I started feeling the pushback and having conversations with people that are clearly not able to acknowledge their privilege.
That doesn't surprise me one little bit.
Right, yeah, it didn't surprise me. It made me super sad. It made me super sad. I mean, especially for people that, you know, they were in leadership here. They were, I mean, and the goal of this congregation was to be a voice for diversity. That the ELCA is the whitest denomination in the United States. And so I think this is that sneaky kind of racism. You know, Madison is a very progressive town. But it is that sense of like, well, you know, like Tony says in the play, I know Black people. Well, that does not mean you're not racist.
Well, and it also gets, I mean, one of the things about the play that is of interest to me in terms of how, generally speaking, I think white people do race, which is different than white people doing racism, is that most white people, particularly when we get older, I think younger people are actually better at having true friends of different backgrounds. It's when you start getting middle-aged and older where people go, oh, I know Black people, because the Black cashier at their favorite Target speaks to them with a smile. Or the people, but my thing is that if you've never had a Black person to your face make you uncomfortable, like have a conversation where they said something where your comfort wasn't centered, then you don't have any Black friends. You have Black acquaintances. And there's not a white friend I have, and I mean close white friends, not the BS white friends, but close white friends who hasn't had to get pissed off by me at least one time in our relationship and is better for it.
let me ask you, that's so interesting to me. I want to ask you a question. I'm a child not only of the Jim Crow South, but I'm a child of the 60s. And, there was all that idealism and all that sort of, at least on the surface, there was this opening up, the love and acceptance, and we were moving toward this. Now, as I look at, so if we say, well, by middle age, we had changed and become, like you said, more resistant. So my question then becomes, we can say, oh, today young people are more, they're more open. What's going to happen? Are they going to do the same when they're middle-aged? Are they, I mean, I don't know. I mean,
I do think that I've had these conversations with my friends of color. Well, I do think that's possible for some of them, because I do think socioeconomic makes a difference regardless of race, right? I will say, I think the huge difference is two things: social media, for all the negatives that people have about social media, and that people have examples that are undeniable. I mean, a 25-year-old white male can't deny the power of a Michelle Obama, whereas a 25-year-old white male 40 years ago literally may not have been able to think of a Black woman who wasn't an entertainer. Like even in this play, getting back to the play, while I liked the play a lot, very much enjoyed the play, very much thought it was thought-provoking, all the things, I thought that it was very interesting. And I deliberately did not look up who the playwright was until after listened to the play. I listened to the play while I was knitting, because I can't. I have an important knitting project. I can't put the knitting project aside for the rest of the world. But it was of interest to me that the only Black character. I mean, can I give a spoiler? I'm not sure how this video is being used. So
no, you go ahead. You can go.
Okay,
ahead. Yes.
That the only Black person ends up being someone who's famous, which gets back to how the construct that I think a lot of white America deals with, where Black people are abstractions. Even when it's a positive, it's still an abstraction. And I think that's the difference for the young people of today, Ted, is that a lot of younger white people aren't dealing with Black people and other people of color as abstractions. They are their classmates. They are the people who they have romantic relationships with. They are the people who they're in different social groups together, where they're actually having to interact with people who are the other in a way that if you are only dealing with people through screens, are in distant relationships, you probably are going to change over time, because you don't have enough people. I mean, to be arrogant, it's hard to be my friend and go, well, Black people are just intellectually inferior. Yeah. How did you think that 5 minutes past having a conversation with me? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I just think it's with all of us. Once you know people who actually are in a group different than what you know anything about, having real conversations, real interactions, it does change things.
Yeah, I think that's very right. And I would say, I would add to that and say that where I was talking from in the 60s was, my hope would be that there is at least a little kernel of that remained, that then maybe grew a bit. And then when social media came in, it enhanced that. But, I guess my problem with my generation is that it seems like we had all these ideals and all this And then we got older and like, oh, I need a house and I need my Mercedes and I need my BMW and I don't want to live in a black neighborhood, and everything was gone. But I still hope, and I don't know of any of them. I don't know of any white people out there in my generation who are still holding that line that they held. And if there is, it's very, very little, you know, and that concerns me.
I think that there's a superiority, and I mean, this play does a really good job of it with Tony representing that superiority that I think that white people, particularly straight white males, are infected with. And I use the word infected because it's not to your advantage to think that you are superior when you're not, because then the first time you lose out, then it blows your mind in a way. Whereas, I mean, that's the benefit of being a Black woman is in a weird way, like the expectations are so low that it doesn't take much for you to be like, oh, damn, she just kicked my ass. You know what I mean? Whereas a white man can be good at something, but if he's not great, society may still look at him as a failure. I don't know, because I'm not, you know, a white person who grew up in the 60s, but I mean, when I look at and hear about things from that era, there's still a superiority. It's still, I'm a flower child because I choose to be open-minded. I'm a hippie because I choose to embrace other people. Not, I really think they're equal to me, but I like looking like I think that.
Right. Yeah, and it's probably, I'm sorry, I don't want to leave Heather out. So Heather, jump in here. I feel like.
Well, and I mean, I think that is, you know, what I was saying about being in a progressive town, being in the North, you know, we have this superiority that everybody thinks being a progressive, quote unquote, liberal town, you know, I'm sure Minneapolis also felt like that before George Floyd. And I think just that awareness of like, wait, the conversation around George Floyd happening in Minneapolis. I've talked to, I mean, that's kind of the Lutheran Mecca is Minneapolis. So I've talked to many of my friends who are pastors in Minneapolis, and it has totally shifted the conversation in the whole church, because we have this sense that, oh yeah, we are welcoming, we are diverse, we, you know, like, again, that sense of like, I know a Black person and therefore I'm not racist. And so I think it opens the conversation. And I think one of my favorite parts of the play was just the ability of these four characters to get to know each other, so that it opened up the conversation of like, again, spoiler alert, you know, at the end when Lily reveals about her son, like how that opens up Tony's world, because he knew and already loved her son. And I just saw this total diversion, but I just saw this new Heineken ad where two people come in from totally opposite places on some continuum, and they don't know this about each other, and they get to know each other, and then it's revealed that this person is a homophobe and this person is homosexual, and so how they have the conversation after they've known each other. And I hope that that's what this past year has done for us culturally, and certainly in the church, is to start opening up the conversation so that we can really have meaningful relationships with people of color, with, you know, gender diversity. I mean, all of the ways that we have kept ourselves separate.
But I think the problem is, I don't think this past year and a half has done as much as white people like to act like it has. What it has done is it still centers white people and white people getting better, getting more aware, having more conversations, you know, and the only thing that is, and I'll be 57 in November. I mean, you know, and the only thing I've seen different in my lifetime is that in this past George Floyd, Breonna Taylor protest, is that more granddaughters and grandsons who look like you all were side by side with the people who look like me. As the only thing that I've seen different, because even in the 60s, right, when there was civil rights, of course, white people have always been part of it. You know what I'm saying? But if you ain't John Brown, if you ain't willing to die for it, you just, you know, you just provided eggs to the breakfast. You're not the chicken who gave, you know, you're not the pig who gave up some ham, you know? And that's where I think the play starts a conversation, but I think that there is a lot of people who only want that conversation to go so far, because real privilege is having to think past, what do I have that I have beyond, I just worked harder for it.
Well, you know, we're historically kind of making comparisons, which I find to be really interesting. It's still, for a white person, it is still not safe, particularly to go out and protest for Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, but it is easier. But in the 60s, a play that I wrote was about how once a man came out who had the beliefs of equality, his whole life would be torn apart if he basically came out and said that he really felt that this was all an injustice. And it was more, I wish that it hadn't been, because I think we would have maybe had more white people, maybe not. I don't know the answer to that. But I guess in a progressive sort of sense, we have to say, well, at least more people are risking a little more than they did back then. I don't know. I mean, I'm posing a question more than anything.
It's still, I mean, I'm curious what you mean when you said that white people still find it riskier to go out. Like, what do you mean physically riskier? Do you mean reputationally riskier? Do you mean?
I think I would say on all those levels, it's less so, like reputationally, physically, okay, emotionally. I think it's less, but again, that's why I wouldn't say that it was not there anymore, because that's not true. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Let me go back to something too. And let me jump into the play just a little bit. You were talking about the end of the play where you saw this sort of dialogue come about. My problem is well, I won't say particularly, but let me be real blunt. I don't like these characters. There's not one thing about any of these characters that I like. From the get-go, I hear them yelling, screaming. It's nothing but conflict and nothing but this atmosphere of, so it's very hard to find early in the play any redeeming values for these people, particularly Tony. I just want him to go away and I don't ever want to see him again. And I want to know what you feel about likability of characters is very, very important to me as a writer. And I would like your comments about the characters, about how they develop, and how, if you're walking into that world of the play, and say you're there for 20 minutes, are you going to sit through the entire play with that group of people? Do you want to spend that much of your life with them?
Honestly, likability matters to me. I don't give a good GD about likability of characters. I mean, I've even had that criticism, not in all my plays, not even probably in most of my plays, but 2 or 3 of my plays. And it's not lost on me that when there's a likability issue in my plays, it's a play that is strongly about race. And it is typically white people who are having the negative reaction to the likability of the play. I mean, I would challenge you, like,
No,
on this,
go ahead.
on this play to go, is the likability factor because, I mean, I guess it gets back to something that we were talking about, protest. It gets back to protest. I mean, protest exists because people sitting in a boardroom have never made for better equity. You know, that people have to, that it takes several braids of work for the work to happen. So I'm not like because I'm in journalism, I can't protest. But even before I came back into journalism, I've only been back in journalism 4 years. Even before that, that's not my style. That's why I'm a playwright. You know, like, I'm a speaker, I'm a writer, I'm someone who uses words in very intentional ways to do what, but I think that the people being on the street matter just as much as any word I write. Like, even to the point of when people block intersections, yes, if you are pissed off because your intersection was blocked, having to go to work, oh well, you got uncomfortable. And if your discomfort makes you think about something for 5 minutes that you wouldn't have thought about, oh well. I mean, do I think that, so my point is that all those approaches matter, right? Like, so likability matters. Somebody sitting down and being very nice to you and explaining to you racism or homophobia or whatever, like, that's nice. And for some people that works, but sometimes the play has to be uncomfortable. You have to walk away going, I didn't like Tony. Let me examine why I didn't like Tony.
I'd love to hear from Heather.
Yeah, I had a similar reaction, but my reaction was more, I know these people. All 4 of these people are in my congregation. And so for me, it was like, Tony's my father-in-law. And, and he's, Lily is in my congregation. So is James. So, I mean, and then the other extraneous characters that they're talking about also. So it just, the characters were familiar, but yeah, caustic. And I think that sense of my discomfort was more, how can I pastor these people? So that was my reaction was, and that's been the difficulty in this congregation, is when I want to talk about how we open up this conversation, I have people that have never thought about their privilege, like Tony, who say, nope, see ya, I'm out of here. And I have a handful of families that have already left. And really, to me, that says I'm doing what needs to be done in some ways, because they had this perception of what welcome looked like, and they weren't really.
Let me ask you something. Give me a maybe more than an example, but if you were approaching I love the word pastor, if you were pastoring someone, how would you pastor Tony? Give me an example of how you think you could effectively pastor Tony.
Yeah, I thought about that at the end of the play too, of wanting him to sit down and think about other people of color that he interacts with, and and again, to kind of personalize that it's not this us versus them idea that he has in his mind, but that what do you have in common? Where do you share, where do you share things with people of color that you didn't even think about before? And how can you hear their voice? How can you hear what James's real pain is? And I truly don't know if he could, but that would be.
Do you think Tony has any pain?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so
I don't think he knows it. But I think, yeah, for sure. I think especially with the dismissal, I mean, the way he kind of dismissed his wife, there's definitely some undertones there. Who knows where that goes?
well, as a director and teaching actors, I say you can't play a villain. You can't. I mean, you've got to find within yourself their humanity, their and when I use the word likability, I mean, that's what I mean more of the core of a character. And I'm not talking about everybody's jovial in the audience, says, oh, isn't he funny, or doesn't he look good, or isn't he handsome, or isn't she, a good old gal, or whatever. I'm saying, is there I've had to do, this is going to sound really awful. I think in a way, many of us on the liberal side, I'm in total distress about Donald Trump and the whole Pandora's box that has been opened up. But I've also had to look and say, I've had to ask the question, what is inside of that? I'm not trying to sympathize. I'm trying to understand, because we can't just understand one side. We've got to understand both sides. And I'm not trying to necessarily take up for white people. And I don't want you to hear that that's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to say, how do you, if we can never say, look at the pain of somebody like Tony and say, God, I hate that son of a bitch. But there's got to be something in this man that is causing this hatred. And wouldn't he be, if he could be liberated from that, would his life be better? In the same way, if James can be liberated from his absolute hatred for the others, if they could be liberated from those, would they be happier people? And I don't know if that's off base or not. I don't know.
Well, two things for me. I don't see James as hatred. I see James as existing in a world where he's a Black man, and period. And you can call that hatred, or you can just call, what is it? Is James Baldwin who said is to be a Black person in America is to live in a perpetual sense of rage. I'm totally misquoting James Baldwin. But here's the thing about Tony that I can get. I think about so many of my white friends who are my age who have said how their parents, some of whom I know, because I've had white friends going back to grade school, went from being these open, similar to what you're getting at, Ted, these open, loving, welcome people when they were young parents, to being these rage-filled bigots. And in every single case, my white friend who has told me that has said, you know what they watch? You know what they watch on a regular basis? They watch Fox News. Because I think what has happened is Fox News has tapped into, you guys tell me if I'm wrong, I'm not white, is tapped into that resentment of white people, that they aren't still on top, that they aren't doing better, that it's not an automatic pass. I've had two white male friends who were, when they were unemployed, two white guys say to me, yeah, see, you can see how that white privilege is working for me. And I just thought it was interesting that they made that comment, and that they made that comment of all people to me, as if secretly I was somehow responsible for, not me, Michelle, but me as a Black person is responsible for their failure to get a job simply because they want one. So I think, so to me, that's the Tony piece that I hear you asking about Ted. You know what I mean? Like, his pain is, and I actually get it. His pain is the resentment of a world that's gone on without his consent.
Is that unlike the Black experience? How would you contrast to that, his experience, contrast that to the Black experience?
When you are born into a system that
I'm asking that as a question. I'm not trying to.
Oh, no. I don't take it any other way. I'm not offended at all. Trust me, if I was offended, I will let you know I'm offended by that question.
Okay.
No, I mean, I just think that being Black in America is being born into a system where you're told up front it's rigged against you.
Right.
Which isn't a victimization. It's just a sort of like women are taught when you walk down a street at night by yourself, be aware, keep your keys out, look, you know what I'm saying? It's that's what you're taught.
Right.
Not to be, when a woman is taught that, it's not because you're weak, you're inferior, you're less than, it's, you got to be safe, period. I mean, and that's what being Black in America is. It's constant acknowledgement that even around good white people, sometimes especially around good white people, that you just have to be conscious of what's going on, what's really going on, and how am I playing into a resentment, a possible resentment? How am I playing into a fear?
Well, it's interesting because I was taught just the same thing about being around a group of Black boys. I had a certain amount of behavior to say, don't do this or don't do that. Now, I wouldn't say it was applicable in the sense of what the emotional toll of that would be, because I think with the Black experience, it's a much more painful thing as opposed to just, watch out. And again, it's denigrating a race when you say that. You say, well, be careful of those Black boys because they kill, they do drugs, they all that.
And the difference is, I would argue, is that as a white person, your fear is situational in the sense that the system is rigged in your favor. Absolutely. You call the police because of, think about it. There's a phrase for when Black men would look at white women and literally get lynched. It was called reckless eyeballing. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to get arrested as a white man merely because you call the police about a Black man, whereas literally we still live in a society where the mere bringing attention to a situation involving racism for a Black person can be dangerous in more ways than one.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that completely. Yeah.
So if I'm afraid of a white man, I have to be afraid of what he might do to me physically, but then I also have to be afraid of, well, how is that going to affect my job? How is that going to affect my reputation in a way that no white man ever has to worry about when it's in reverse?
Right.
It's been, very, very engaging. And before we close, I wanted very much to understand in parallel, because you are a Lutheran pastor, Heather, and you are a woman. Can you speak to that experience and the parallel that Ted engaged and Michelle engaged in terms of that was other, growing up, that was an other thing. And that's really what the conversation is so fascinating, is
Alexa,
this
stop.
other. So I would find it very interesting to just have your conversation about that, what other means to you and how you have been pigeonholed perhaps as being other.
I mean, for me personally, well, like I said, I did not grow up in a world where I didn't think I couldn't be a pastor. Certainly, I have colleagues that are female that grew up that way, that grew up in other denominations, but I think that sense of there's always some amount of discrimination against a female pastor. I'm the first female pastor this congregation has had. And so I meet that pretty regularly. But I think it's like what Michelle was talking about. It's something, it's your worldview. You just know to prepare for it. And, especially older white men, I know the conversation is going to come up at some point, like, oh, sweetie, thank you for whatever, and getting a tap on the ass. And like, I want to kind of be aware that happens, but not to give them permission to do that. I think that's similar to that sense of being trained to walk with your keys out as a woman. Like, that doesn't just give people permission to assault me,
Right,
but to
exactly.
right. So I mean, there's a difference between being prepared to know that you feel other in certain situations, but that doesn't give anybody permission to treat you like other. And so I think that's the sense of the justice that I hope we continue to look for within and without the church. I think that's what I'm hoping for in my congregation and my denomination, is that we start looking for what justice means, so that I don't know if it's possible for us to get away from feeling like other, like any of us feeling like other in certain situations. But I think when we do the us versus them BS, that helps no one. So I think from my perspective, feeling like God has called us to love everyone in the same way that God loves, that's what I want to keep talking about, preaching.
I have a question too, though, on that. Don't you feel like Ted and I'm gonna ask Gerald this too, Ted and Gerald, that which is why I felt like Tony resonated a lot of truth, that this is the first time in American society that white men are feeling othered?
Well, I don't, because I'm a gay man and I've always felt like the other. I mean, I feel like I'm in the kind of the same, not the same boat, but I've never felt, so I really can't really speak to that in a true way, except through observation.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
I will say that I think I do navigate two different worlds, and I've always understood implicitly that I was in some shape or form a part of the other. But I also got incredible, powerful signals about individuality growing up, mentoring, and being, so, and I was specifically told that if you understood that if you were going to be on the outside and it would be a lonely road you would hold. But the power of seeing those individuals in my life and their effect on me, and wanting to be who they were giving me signals through their love and concern, uh, helped with not feeling so awful or about being the other. But I'm also more recently, I do feel very strongly that I have had to reconcile with, we are in a white man in the minority. But you know, I have had little pieces of that throughout my entire life here in New York City, where I had soul searching to do because people wanted me to be part of them, and they were non-white. They wanted to, you know, but I was came across as being very arrogant, very aloof, very, you know, very not entitled, but just I was bigger than, you know, they couldn't connect with me. But then more recently, I have wrestled with the fact that it's no longer just a white man's profession. Whether we are writers, whether we're artistic directors, whether we are directors. So that's been humbling. That's been humbling. But I know that in my mind, it's necessary. It's the right thing to do. We have to open up the floodgates, and you know, so that's a lot of soul searching. So
You know, the other thing I would say for me is, as you're talking, that becomes interesting to me is I don't know that in my dynamic of my world growing up, it was sort of like being special, being the other was good, you know, that being other was good. Now, I'm not saying about being gay or anything, but being creative or being smart or being whatever was kind of applauded. And sometimes I just wish, why can't we all be the other? If everybody was the other, we would be,
Yeah.
we would all find our specialness, and you know, we wouldn't.
But you know that when
No, that's
people,
idealistic. Yeah.
well, yeah, because you know, for example, when a Black person, for example, talks about being othered, it is not othered as in special. It is in othered as in
I
less.
know. I
You
said
know,
Wait a
I know
minute.
I'm being idealistic. You know.
Say that again, Michelle, because I want to hear that.
is, yeah, but the kind of other that Ted is talking about is the positive other.
Yeah.
When people when you talk about Black people feeling othered, gay people feeling othered,
I know.
women feeling othered, we are very specifically talking not about being special, not about being unique, but about being less than in a majority demographic, whether it's the only Black person at the table, literally, whether it's a boardroom or a rehearsal room, you know, whether it's, you know, that's why when folks get awards and people go, why are they saying the first Black person to get that? Why does their color have to be? Because honey bunny, if somebody is the first to get something, that means that all these other years that the people who could have been up for it didn't get it. And we love to live in a world where we act like this is about merit. And, you know, merit has always been BS. Merit has been about hard work. It's been about luck. It's been about timing. It's been about who likes you. It's about who is liked less than you. I mean, it's about all those things. And I say that as somebody who has had awesome things happen to me and who has had horrible things happen to me. And some of the good things I didn't deserve, some of the bad things I totally deserve, you know? But so it's not about, oh, if it happened to me and it's bad, oh, it's because of racism and sexism. No, I mean, I got a rejection yesterday. I'm like, yeah, yeah, my script wasn't very good in what I entered it in. Not, I bet some white guy got it. It's like, yeah,
Right.
you know.
Right.
Well, I just wanted to footnote in that I think I can identify with what Ted has mentioned in terms of the other, because I too was that I was a recipient in so many ways of special, good, individual, and so I totally understand that. But then I had an awakening. I had an awakening when I left the world of my immediate family and upbringing. I had an awakening on so many levels, and had I just gravitated toward non-white friends and people I was working with on some capacity, and they liked me. But they said, Gerald, let me have a conversation with you. So I think it was being present and understanding about the real deal. And thank you, thank you, Michelle. That was very enlightening to understand what the other means in so many different ways, and especially when it is about the other for someone of another color, and how we embrace that.
And real quick, I just left the country, in terms of getting off the continent for vacation in the last few years. And when I go to Europe, and I know that Europe has all the countries have their colonizing backgrounds, but it's really interesting as a Black American to go to Europe several times and to literally not feel what I call the gaze. Not gaze as in GAYS, but the GAZE that's there, that's so subtle in America. Like I always say, whenever I go any place where I'm not already known by everybody in the room, I get the immediate gaze, which is the assessment that white people, even the best white people, inherently do of evaluating what kind of Black just walked in the room. Is that a safe Black? Is that an acceptable Black? Is that a fearful? Is that someone I should fear? And those are the things that I think, getting back to the play, which is why making the Black person James Baldwin, even on a subconscious way, makes for a really different story than if it's just ordinary Black person who is not eloquent, who is not educated, who is not someone who can pontificate, walks into that same diner.
I would say to you that there is, I think a lot of it is a question of degree as well. I think we all evaluate. The gaze happens probably more maybe judgmentally, but I get the gaze from being fat. I'm fat shamed, and I
can relate.
I hope he doesn't sit by me, or is he going to fit in the airplane seat? Or so they're all kind of gazes that many of us receive, and so I guess part of what I'm saying is they're being special or being different or being the other comes in many, many, many ways other than just race.
But I'm going to challenge you on, I want to challenge you, Ted, to think about something when it's over. Because one of my sayings in life is there is nothing bad that can happen to you in America made better by being Black. So if you feel you're fat shamed, do you think any fat Black person is less fat shamed? They're dealing with exactly what you're talking about, which is real and legitimate plus. You know what I'm saying? So like when I've had white women, for example, are good at saying, it's not race, it's sexism. Do you think that a mind that is sexist has canceled out racism? I hear lots of white men go, well, this wasn't race, it was classism. do you think that someone who is classist isn't also having a veneer of racism on top? You know what I'm saying? So my point is just merely, you are 1000% right about there are a million different ways to get the gays and be discriminated against. But I'm just saying, still in 2021 America, add race on top of that.
I'll take that as a question. I'll take that as a question to think.
Yes.
I will. I won't answer it, but
Yeah.
I will take it as a good question to think about.
Mhm.
Very good. Well, I want to thank each of you. This has been a very challenging and a very deep and a very profound conversation that we've had, and all over ideas and themes about story from Relatively Conscious and character. And I can't thank you enough. And I just want to thank each of you individually, Mr. Ted Swinley, our moderator, and Michelle Tyreen Johnson, and Pastor Heather Hayward. Thank you very, very much. And I look forward to engaging with each of you again.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Wonderful to meet you all. Wonderful to
Yes.
see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for a great talk. Okay.
Okay.
It
Bye.
was.
Take care.
Yeah, it was good. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.